Here is a self-portrait by Roy Lichtenstein. Does it tell us more about what he looked like or what he did? The dots vary in size and density to suggest shading and contrast with the stripes and solid tones. Although Roy Lichtenstein grew up in Ohio, he was born in 1923 in New York City and returned there in his 20s to begin his career as an abstract expressionist painter. But it wasn't long before he started painting pop art. He was one of the few artists to use words and lettering in his pictures, and the only one to use speech balloons so familiar in comic strips. He also used enlarged printer's Ben-Day dots that he made with a stencil. Late in the 60s, he gave up comic strips, but he kept the dots and painted other subjects. He died in 1997. The source for this amusing image was a bubblegum wrapper. Roy Lichtenstein recognized the wide popularity of the great appeal of the Walt Disney characters and chose to capitalize on it with this breakthrough painting, Look Mickey. Although it doesn't have the typical Ben-Day dot technique, it does use the enlarged dimensions, being about 6 feet wide. Notice how the primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, give emphasis to the painting. When Roy Lichtenstein created this image, Girl with Ball, in 1961, pop art was a brand new movement in the art world, and this painting is almost identical to a clipping from the resort section of the Sunday New York Times. Although he later changed the composition of the original image, Lichtenstein used a projector to enlarge the clipping, filled in the Ben-Day dot areas with a screen stencil, and reproduced it. If you think this looks like a Picasso portrait, you're right. It does look like Pablo Picasso's Woman with a Flowered Hat. Along with his reproductions of comic strip characters, Roy Lichtenstein made interpretations of paintings by world-famous artists. This one shows a woman with a fancy hat sitting in a red chair. Where Picasso's painting was done in a cubist style, the pop art version, called Woman with Flowered Hat, has shown the woman with flat color, heavy black lines, and textures made with the dotted screen. Notice how many colors had to be applied to the canvas, each with a different screen. You have looked closely at each of the paintings by Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein, and have listened to the descriptions of these artists' subjects, techniques, and styles. Warhol made many series of multiple prints using subjects that were completely familiar to the American public. Lichtenstein used such well-known images as comic strips, advertisements, and famous paintings, but he modified an industrial process of Ben-Day reproduction to produce his pop art pictures. Let's see if you can identify two works by one of these artists and one by the other. Of course, you recognize the subject of this picture, called 5 Coke Bottles. The artist shows us 5 empty bottles of an American product and its logo that are known all around the world. But look closely. Although the bottles look the same, they are at slightly different levels and distances apart. Instead of the pale green glass and bright red logo, the artist has substituted his own colors in this mechanical screen print. Who is the artist who worked in this way? Right, Andy Warhol. The melody haunts my reverie is a line from a song popular in America in the mid-1960s. This screen print, entitled Reverie, shows a girl singing the words into a microphone. The artist has used bright primary colors to screen his image to look like a comic strip picture. By combining a familiar technique with words from a well-known song, he produced a print that had instant appeal to young Americans. Pink, yellow, and blue make the image simple and direct, filling in the drawing as though it were in a comic book. Who is the pop artist who made this picture? You're right if you answered Roy Lichtenstein. This is a multiple portrait of the wife of President John Kennedy, called 16 Jackies. Are all of the images exactly alike? The portrait was made after the assassination of the president, and if you look carefully, you can see different expressions on Jackie's face because some of the photographs from which the prints were made were taken before the tragedy. Notice how the color fits the mood. This artist often used news events with which the public was familiar for his subjects. Have you identified this famous pop artist? Yes, Andy Warhol. Did you do well on that little exercise? Now try 3 more works by the same artists. Look for their unique styles, their subject matter, and the special techniques each artist has used. After making his first pop art picture of some Disney characters earlier in 1961, this artist began to use other familiar cartoon figures in his work, like this one, called Popeye. Popeye was an ugly sailor and something of a clown, but he was also a defender of the weak and never hesitated to combat evil. This theme was recurrent in American action comics, and it soon became an important aspect of this artist's paintings. Notice the tattoo on Popeye's arm, and one source of his strength, the can of spinach, as well as the traditional graphic indication of action and contact. Of course, you recognize the maker of this copy of a comic book episode. Yes, Roy Lichtenstein. Is this painting, printmaking, or sculpture? These screen-stenciled wooden boxes look very much the same as the corrugated cardboard boxes that are delivered to grocery stores everywhere, every day. But these boxes are empty, and they're stacked in a gallery and considered to be art. Pop artists recognized the emphasis on packaging appeal, which encouraged customers to buy more than what they needed. Was the pop artist just tricking the public by presenting such objects as art? Many people thought so, but as critics, art dealers, and collectors became enthusiastic supporters, this popular art caught on, and it became widely accepted. Can you recognize the style and technique of the artist who made this picture? Did you say Andy Warhol? You're right. The pop art movement faded as other art forms emerged in the late 1960s, but many pop artists used the skills they had developed to paint different subject matter. This painting, Bauhaus Stairway, is an example of one artist's interpretation of the art of another period. Bauhaus was a German style of architecture and industrial art in the 1920s and early 30s, and was characterized by severely stylized geometric forms. This painting combines that kind of design with the commercial technique of enlarged Ben-Day dots applied through a screen of circular holes. What geometric shapes can you find? Can you see where the red dots were gradated to create form? Who do you think managed to combine his own way of painting with this earlier kind of art? Correct, Roy Lichtenstein. You're going